In this video, let's go over some climbing mistakes that beginner climbers make. Number one, and this one really hurts my soul, it's just not using enough chalk. So you're a beginner climber, right? The important thing about chalk is, number one, it dries out your hand. Now, what does a dry hand mean? Now, a dry hand allows you to hold on to literally any surfaces a lot better as opposed to a wet hand. And this is especially true for smooth surfaces, such as something that's slopey or more rounded off and doesn't have much of an end cut. So when you chalk up, you want to chalk one hand at a time. And you don't want to be frugal. You really want to get your hands super white and all that. Likewise, if the thing you're climbing on doesn't have any chalk, you should also chalk it up. And then with your brush it off. And then with your lungs, and that'll make it a lot more easier to hold. And if you're just resting, waiting to go, you should chalk up your hands, even though you're not gonna go for like 2-3 minutes, just to make sure they're at most optimal dryness when you do go. You could climb without shoes pretty decently, and you could climb without protection pretty decently, but without chalk, you're really not climbing as good as you could be by approximately 80 to 90%, especially if you're doing it outside. The second mistake would be just a general neglect of your poling prowess. Because what happens when you're on the wall and you're holding complete jogs, and you're literally just too physically weak to reach upwards, no matter how technical and how footsie you are? And the answer is, well, you're just too weak. So this motion right here, because when you're climbing like a V0 to like V2, everything you're holding is basically a pull-up bar. So it would make sense that if you get good at pulling on a pull-up bar, then that would directly translate to pulling on these holds, which are basically just pull-up bars on the wall, because of how juggy they are. So you really don't want to neglect your pull-ups. And when it comes to doing pull-ups, you could do negatives to start off. You could hold isometrics, or you completely detest the idea of focusing on your pull-ups on an actual pull-up bar. You could do drills on the climbing wall while you're climbing, such as 3-second lock-offs, 1, 2, 3. Or you could even do 3 seconds lock-off with 2 hands, 1, 2, 3, and then move on that way. And over time, you notice your strength start to build, and that's just a good thing. Number 3 is just giving up way too easily. Now, when you first start off climbing, you kind of don't want to think too much. Therefore, when you hop on a climb and you immediately just fall off, you kind of just want to move on because you're holding the position and it just feels absolutely impossible to hold. But if you just think about it for a little bit of time, you start to notice a little bit more nuance. For example, this climb right here has this big volume foot that I didn't notice when I first initiated. Therefore, using big brain prowess, and the move is now possible. Still hard though, of course. Because let's say you climb V2, V3, okay? And then for some odd reason, you encounter like a V1 or V2 you can't do, and you're just like, well, this is wrong. No, the thing here is, if you could do most V1/V2s, and you're getting shut down on V1/V2, that just means it's more of a technical prowess thing than anything else. Therefore, all you really need to do is sit down and think about, how do I climb this climb properly in order to climb it? Because if it's a V1, V2, and I know I can climb V2, V3, that means it just must be a technical thing. I just need to figure it out. So if it's just a move that I'm not used to, this just means it's a new move that I need to rediscover or to discover in order to do it, if that makes sense. Number 4 is just avoiding the steeper wall angles. Now, eventually, this is just gonna become a total weakness in your climbing that's gonna hold you back. And it's better to tackle it when you're as weak as possible, as to oppose when you become really specialized at, like, say, vertical stuff or slab stuff, because it takes less physical prowess. All you're doing by avoiding the steeper angle climbs is creating a climbing style that has a slew of weaknesses, and not to mention maybe even some fear. And we definitely don't want that. Likewise, if you hate doing slab, do more slab. It's just gonna be a weakness in your climbing. Same principle. Number 5 is not stretching. Now, you don't need to be as flexible as me, but you will notice that sometimes when you're climbing, if you don't have the ability to open up your hips, it makes certain movements much harder than they have to be. And if you simply spend some time stretching a little bit, you'll be able to climb much more less encumbered, which a lot of climbers do need to do more of. And probably the biggest mistake is just not training fingers until you're really strong. It's never too early to start building your finger strength. You don't need to use the really small holds or hang one hand at a time. You could start on the bigger holds. And when you hang, you could hang with your feet on the ground or slightly drag just like this. Simply adding 10 to 15 minutes of light hangboarding before or after your climbing session will really help you acclimate your fingers to holding the holds that are on the wall, which are, believe it or not the biggest things in the world. Therefore, hangboarding is pretty applicable. Also, just a quick tip, most hangboards are asymmetrical. That means Both of these are 15, both of these are 20. Both of these are something, and both of these are the same dimensions. Therefore, don't make the mistake of holding both of them at the edge and wondering why one side feels bigger than the other, and that's because one side is bigger than the other. Anyways, that was the video. You should do some of it, and I'll see you next time, partner.